Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us again here at Startup Grind Houston. I'm really excited about what we're doing in 2023 and who we are bringing on. For those of you that this might be just your first or second listen, we are the world's largest startup community, and we're changing the world one startup at a time. Now, Startup Grind's values are really simple. We give first, we make friends, and we help others. And that's how we lead our conversations in the space. Our mission is to give startups everywhere education and opportunity to build, grow, and scale their companies. And so our community is startups, founders, innovators, creators, and Houston specifically has changed its mission where we're connecting and really promoting marginalized voices. And because Houston is an international city and it's one of the largest ports in our country, we have 2 international airports. We speak 145 different languages here in our city, where over 48% of people speak that language at home. And so we're the most diverse city in the country. And a lot of people still think New York City has that claim, and they don't. So that you know, my goal for our Houston chapter is to be the bridge to cities and countries around the world, as well as the connection point for marginalized voices in the startup space. We have plenty of other people with their hands on the mic, and you're going to see that we're always going to have hand over the mic to people like Ella Tyler, who is the COO of Lead 5050. She's in Exmouth, England. It's a port town on the east bank of the mouth of River Exe, and it's also near Dartmoor National Park. And because you guys know me, you're a Dingitus gal, and I love nature in national parks. You're probably not going to expect me to ask you this, but have you got a chance to visit that and tell me what that national park is like?
All the time, Michelle. It's only less than an hour, say 45 minutes. I can be at the national park. It's got ponies, wild ponies, tours, Dartmoor. Have you ever heard The Hound of the Baskervilles by with Sherlock Holmes? That's set there on the moors. Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier, again set on the moors. So lots of books set there. Very, very amazing place to visit. You would love it, Michelle. You'll have to come.
Oh, I'm going to take you up on that when I do travel back to the UK, because I have this huge fascination with history. And so everything that you mentioned just sounds right up my alley. Well, I wanted our conversation today. One of the things that I've loved is Ellen and I met on LinkedIn, and I love the fact that her mission inside her company as the COO of Lead 5050 is to help us close that gender pay gap. Tell me, how did you actually become, who raised their hand and said, Ella, we want you to work with us? Were you and the CEO, did y'all come together and create this, or were you brought on board later?
No, I'm a founder of a startup. So similar to your listeners, I started, I'm 51 now, and I started 17 years ago. I started my own business. It was actually an English language school. I had twins. If you go right back, I was working for big blue chip companies in the UK in sales and marketing. And I was driving up and down the M5 in my company car, and I was loving life. I loved working for these big companies. And the lifestyle it gave me. But then, of course, I got married and had children. And I did what most women do in that situation, is that I took the step back. My husband's an architect, but we were both pretty much earning the same wage. But I didn't even question it. It was the norm then for women to just take a step back, and for men to carry on with their career. They don't miss a beat. But women, and I think, and it's still the case now, and I think that's why we need to talk about it more. Women sacrifice their career because that's what society expects. So that's what I did. And when the children were little, I gave up my career. I couldn't continue driving up and down the motorway. And so I looked around and I did again what a lot of women do, and a lot of entrepreneurial women do in that situation, is I started my own business. I made my own career because the systems and the processes and the structures that are in place even to this day don't really support caring roles. So I made my own business and I started up an English language school, and that allowed me to take the children to school and pick them up and be there when they were sick because I was my own boss. I didn't have to ask anyone's permission. And yeah, and that, I started off with 80 students in the first year. And by the time I sold it 2 years ago, just before the pandemic, I had 5,000 students. So it grew and grew and grew. And, it was a big success. But then the pandemic hit. And I realized that actually it wasn't something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I sold it. I had went through a management buyout, and the team that were there have actually bought me out. So that worked out really well. But in the meantime, Michelle, what had happened is that as I progressed through my career, or my business career in the international education industry, I met a woman, Leanne Lineker, who also runs an English language school in Liverpool in the north of England. And we became firm friends at all the events every year that we went to. And then Sheryl Sandberg released her book, Lean In. I'm sure you've read it. And this was about 7 years ago. And we were very excited by this because it was like a new thing. We'd both bought it in the airport on the flight to Berlin, just by pure coincidence. We were talking about it. Oh my God, I bought that at the airport as well. It was just out. And we we're very excited by it and by the concept that, it was kind of an awakening, really, because up until that point, I'd just kind of gone along with the system that was in place. And I hadn't questioned it. Like I said, giving up my career, taking my husband's name is another thing that I wouldn't do now. I just kind of went along with the status quo. And Cheryl kind of shook us awake and said, hang on, we think it's equal, but it's not equal. And we looked around, Leanne and I, at this event, and we said, do you know what? We might be quite at the top of our game in our minds. We both earn one school each, very successful school. But when you look around this room, the people who are the most successful, who have the chains of schools across the world, in Canada, in America, in Malta, in the UK, the ones that are white men. So what conversations are they having? What rooms are they being in where this is being, where they're managing to get these opportunities? Because I sure as hell am not in any of these rooms. I'm not having these conversations. I'm kind of grinding my own way up in a linear fashion and growing my business organically every year, slowly and surely. And you look around, these men with their chain schools are getting huge investment from somewhere. And we went in those rooms and we decided, really, coupled with reading Lean In and speaking to each other, is that they're just so much better at networking and having these, golf clubs and meetings and discussing stuff. And women don't do that. And why don't we do that? Well, we don't do that because we have caring responsibilities. So when work finishes, we have to rush off and pick our kids up. We can't go to the pub after work and have a drink. We can't do a golf day on a Saturday. Some people have caring responsibilities of their parents. Some usually falls on women, and men don't have that, and they have the freedom to network. And that's, so we decided to create a networking group in the international education industry, and that was Lead 50/50. So we started that off, and it was very successful. We got loads of women to join, and we got companies to join. And we started doing awards every year in Berlin, which is still going on to this day, to the seventh annual awards. And that was kind of going on whilst we were running our own businesses. And then the pandemic hit. And then that's when I thought, do you know what? I really am passionate about gender equality in the workplace. And I really feel that that's my calling and that it's something that I want to do. And so I made this pivot. I sold my business and I decided to focus on something that I'm passionate about. And it was the first time when I got to, I suddenly realized as well that I was doing this job, running this English language school that was very successful, but didn't really particularly enjoy doing it. But I was just doing it because it was successful and it was bringing me in money. And it wasn't until the pandemic came and I took a breath and I thought, well, actually, I don't like the huge logistical nightmare of running an English language school. I'm constantly stressed. I wake up anxious. The summer was a nightmare because that's when all the students used to come. And it was the perfect opportunity to step back from that. And so we decided to think, we want to make a change. And Leanne felt the same, and she's gone down the same path as I have. So we're both in it together with Lead 50/50 now. And we decided we wanted to fund. I mean, we have got big ambitions, Michelle. We want to fundamentally change the workplace so that men and women are leading 50/50. That's our vision, because we believe that the current masculine leadership paradigm doesn't really work for most people, men or women, and that changes are coming and change is overdue, and that most people want change, and we want to be a part of that and to facilitate that. So how can we do it? And it's funny because I was talking about Sheryl Sandberg, who I still think is fantastic, but the mood has changed since we started. And actually, there's a lot of people, and I agree with this, are saying, do you know what? We're exhausted. Women are saying we're exhausted from leaning in. We're fed up with it, because we can't just keep leaning in. It's exhausting, because guess what? We're leaning in and we're still having to do everything else. We still have, because for women, having it all actually means doing it all. And that's exhausting. So it's not us that need to lower our voices, speak slower, wear a suit, not put emojis at the end of our messages, not use exclamation marks, dress in a certain way, basically try to become the male idea of what professionalism is. It's actually the systems and the processes and the structure of work that needs to change. And again, that benefits men as much as women. So we have developed an accreditation, and we've developed some software that can audit policies and processes of a business. So we go into a business, and we're developing the AI to go with it as well, which is really exciting. And we can produce a report at the end of this process where we go into big companies, audit everything, do a lived experience survey with the people, and all those data points come together, and we can come up with a bespoke report that gives insights and recommendations of how to close your gender pay gap and to rebalance the workplace. And it's focusing purely on gender. So that's unique, and I believe that it can make a huge difference to the workplace. If every company did that, it would make huge fundamental changes.
So one of the interesting things that I heard as you were talking, well, actually a couple of points. One, a conversation point that's been really beneficial, even though it brought a lot of challenges with it, and that was the pandemic.
Yeah.
It gave people what I call the breathing space. Even though there were additional responsibilities, they weren't having to travel and go back and forth to offices. Yes, they had the challenge of trying to figure out how to work at home, but people are highly adaptable. They adapted to it rather quickly, and then all of a sudden it allowed them the space to start questioning everything they were told about structures and systems that were required. And all of a sudden we saw what I call Swiss cheese holes in everything. Everything from the fact that because people weren't out as much, we even saw animals and nature start to take back public spaces differently. They didn't take over, but they started taking space back, which to me also gave us the opportunity to realize the profound effect that we have on our living environment. And I think what I noticed when I talked with people about that aspect of it is it made a very easy lead in to start talking about, now that we've actually seen how that happens with the entire ecosystem that all of us live in, where are we having influences? And here's where my indigenous culture thinking comes. Where are we as humans having influence that are not productive for anybody that's in the circle? Whether it's nature, water, air, animals, people. And what does that allow us to think about and do differently? And it's funny how that is, people have embraced that, even if their passion is not to be a social justice warrior, they've embraced it in a really different way than before. Before, we were told, well, it's just not possible. We can't make money and protect everything. And we're learning that all those mindsets are incorrect, and we do have the ability to completely change how we operate together in our, as you said, our lived experiences, in our big ecosystems and our small ecosystems. And so I'm excited to see what's the potential to happen with having more marginalized voices at the table. Because while you want to have 50-50 leadership, I know you've seen mine. Mine's about having 75% marginalized voices at all decision-making tables everywhere. So
Totally.
we have to look at what are the opportunities where we are now. We're acknowledging where some of these biases are finally being seen in a new way. We're acknowledging that people are really adaptable and they've started learning for themselves, and that empowerment has changed the dialogue inside of the business world. What are you seeing people doing differently that you think will allow us to get to that 50-50 point?
Well, I think the pandemic was a real, obviously, an incredible global phenomenon that forced us all to look at things differently. And like you say, question things and say, yes, of course, it is possible to do these things. We've been, especially women, had the blinkers pulled. We've been told that we can't do this and we can't do that. And men as well, the caring responsibilities. We've been told that women are natural carers, that we're naturally good at multitasking, that we're naturally empathetic, that we're naturally, made to stay at home and look after the children, and that men are naturally the leaders and that they're the confident ones. And we've believed this nonsense. And it's things like that that I think people are beginning to question, because they've been shown, it's fast forwarded. This idea of working from home is, obviously, we would never have been to this before the pandemic happened. I mean, I ran an international language school where my customers were all over the world, and I never went on Skype. It was Skype before Zoom, if you remember. I don't know what happened to Skype, but that just disappeared off the place. I mean, God, Skype, that was your moment. But Zoom, I never even went on a Skype. I used to hate looking at myself on a video and speaking like that. Now I'd much rather do this than have a phone call. So in the space of 3 years, we've totally changed the way we work. We've saved so much money and resource by not having to travel. So many things have changed. And I think that's made people question other things as well, and look at other things. And one of the key things that I've noted, well, one of the things, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in the UK, there's a lot of talk about menopause now. And like I said, I'm 51, and I remember thinking that menopause was embarrassing. You shouldn't really talk about it. You might feel the same way, Michelle. Talk about certain age group. You don't, it means that the woman's over the hill. It's a bad thing for women. Now in the UK, oh my God, if you don't talk about the menopause, then what the hell? You should be talking about it left, right, and center. A woman of my age. It's just completely the norm, and that's changed in the past couple of years. So it gives me such hope that you can make huge changes in our lifetime, changes that you would never have thought. I mean, I can remember people smoking at their desk when I first started work in the UK. That was incredible. They're just literally smoking, or people smoking in planes, and that's now completely taboo. So things can change in our lifetime, but we are brainwashed into thinking that they can't, and that because why? Because the status quo benefits a very small portion of very, very rich people. And those very, very rich people are loving it because it's all working for them. But it's not all work. It's not working for the rest of us. And one of the key things that I think would really change the workplace is that if we took away the stigma, which sounds so ridiculous when you say it out loud, but we took away the stigma of men caring for their own children. You know, it's absolutely insane that that should all fall on the shoulders of women. It's a nonsense, and it's detrimental to the men, the women, and the children that have come through that system for for all these years. It serves capitalism very, very well. It makes sense. If you just were drawing up a system, a business model, for example, of course you have one partner at home looking after the children, one partner goes out to work. Yes, that makes sense from a financial point of view. Of course it does. But actually the children benefit from having time with their dad when they're first born. And no one ever said they should spend less time with their children. Fathers should spend less time with their children. It benefits the mental health of the mothers to go out. It benefits the children, the men. Everyone benefits from it, apart from potentially at first the corporations themselves, the business.
It reminds me actually of the agricultural time frame that we tend to not talk about anymore, but it's not that far removed in my own family, in that those men didn't have to, quote, go out away from home to work either. My grandfather was a farmer. And so the entire family was a unit and did things that he was around when the kids were little. And that tended to change more for people around the early 1900s. It just happened to be that, my mother grew up in a farming family, up into the 50s. And so it was a later change for them. But it is fascinating to watch men's and women's roles, and how, as you say, how that operates inside of economic systems that only really support few. It's fascinating to me as we're literally watching this uprising happen from one country to the other. And so I'm wondering, if we had this much change in 3 years,
Yep.
what is the opportunity for us now to start thinking in a really creative, innovative way of what it could look like 3 years from now?
It's exciting, isn't it? That's exactly the mood that I am, I'm all over that. I love it. I love the feeling of hope and positivity that the obviously the pandemic was terrible in many ways, but lots of good things have come out of it. And that idea that change can happen, I'm all for that. And I know it can. And I'm a very positive and optimistic person. But one thing I would say to your startup community, and for people who are listening out there, startups are mainly men, aren't they? They're mainly white men who are doing, entrepreneurial. It suits them. In the UK, for every pound that is invested in startups, one penny goes to female founded startups. But so what I would say to your community that's listening, to the men that are listening, is that try and think about the diversity in you right from the beginning, and try and model it from the beginning. Think about employing women and people of color and different people, and representing those people, because what happens is you employ people in your own image. It's very, very easy to do that. I've done it myself in my language school. A white middle class woman from the south of England would walk in and I think she looks all right. Do you know what I mean? And I didn't, it was unconscious bias. Didn't even think about it. I thought, oh, she'll be all right. And really, I'm thinking she looks a bit like me. So she'll be fine. She's university educated. She'll be great. But actually, it doesn't serve you as a business, that's for sure, because diversity of thought, there's so many studies that show that diverse leadership, in fact, diversity throughout any business makes that business more profitable. It makes perfect sense because you have different ideas that come in. You know, it's like when companies say, oh, well, you know, they've got a 90% senior leadership team, and they say, well, no, women came, we just employed the best people for the job. We don't believe in quotas. You can't possibly be just employing the best people for the job when they're all white men. See, that can't be true. 90% of them can't be that just isn't the case, because there's 50% men and 50% women. And we already know from exit polls when they go to university and they come out, girls coming out of university actually perform better than men in exams coming out of university. So they're not less intelligent, and they're not, and lots of studies have shown that make excellent leaders, different types of leaders in a lot of ways, but still excellent leaders that get the job done. So they're not just employing the best person for the job, they're employing people that look like them. And they don't even know they're doing it. This is not a conspiracy theory. They're not out, you know, doing this deliberately. It's just years and years and decades of unconscious bias, which we all suffer from. And anyone who says they don't see color or they don't see gender, absolute nonsense, right? And if you're the type of person who's saying that, then you're never going to see the truth, because we've all been brainwashed. I have to stop myself from believing that men are better leaders. You know, if I'm in a room and there's an older white man wearing a suit and he's the CEO of a company, my instant thought in my mind is, oh, he's better than me. But I tell you what, Michelle, most of the time you only need to speak to them for 20 minutes. You think, God, how did you get into that position? Am I right? Bloody hell, you think, what are you doing in that position of leadership? But my instant reaction is, they're better than me. And I get the imposter syndrome coming in. And that's my unconscious bias, and I have to check myself. And of course, we're all going to have that. We've been brought up in a world where men are, from the beginning, the biggest insult that a child can be given, a boy can be given in the playground is, don't be such a girl. That's the biggest insult that they can have, you know, next to don't be gay or are you gay. So this is why we think white heterosexual men are the best. They're the best in the world. They're not, but that's how we've been brought up, and it's all within us, and it's all these things that we need to check and stop, try and stop, you know, that type of thing. But it's fun and we can do it. We just need to keep shouting about it, Michelle.
Well, I totally agree that being very conscious of language choices is a very fundamental and pillar position that all of us can take inside of any conversation, but especially this one, because how we talk about things has everything to do with how we respond to it, how our behavior shows up. What would you say? Because when I was listening to you at the very beginning and you were talking about something that Lead 50/50 does, they go inside of companies and they do a lot of different data pulls to help people be able to look at lived experiences, not just their opinion put down on paper in a business report. How can, because the first thing that came to my mind, because we've all heard it, was I could literally see, you know, this elderly senior VP or CEO saying, we don't need another report. What are we going to do with a report? But what are the opportunities that come from that are really different, so we can start stimulating people's minds as to where they can start looking to take different actions and better responsibility from the data that's in that?
Well, there are so many opportunities, because I mean, that visual you had of the older man, I mean, in the UK, they're called boomers. I don't know if you have that terminology in the US. And you know, not to be too rough, but they're dying out now, you know, and the younger ones coming up. I mean, by 2025, 75% of the workforce are going to be millennials. And millennials have got much different views on things. They don't share the same values. So if you want a succession plan for your company and you don't want to be a dinosaur, then you need to be addressing these issues that are important to younger people who are coming through. Younger people don't value working long hours, and they're not wedded one job for life. They have totally different approach and view about what they're going to get out of their career. They're quite happy to jump from job to job. That costs companies hundreds of thousands of pounds all the time to replace these people. If you want to be an employer of choice, you have to think about your audience, your customer, in terms of your employee and what they want. And they want to see that companies are taking diversity and inclusion seriously. You know, there's stats that say 60% of people under 25 would leave a job if they didn't think that their company shared the same values. I mean, God, when I was under 25, I didn't even know what my values were, let alone I couldn't care less what the company's values were. I just wanted to do my job and get paid. That's all I wanted. And I wanted to have fun. Couldn't care less about anything else. But that is not the case with social media and all this type of stuff, knowledge, so much information they get all the time. So if you want your company to be forward thinking, you need to get involved with these things. You need to take this type of stuff seriously, you know, because your employees are, and retention and attraction of staff is very, very difficult at the moment. But if you are LEED 50/50 accredited, that shows them that you are taking gender equality and diversity and equity seriously. And that is a huge plus to look. It's a different market out there. It's changed, and
It's a
companies
different
need
market,
to
and
change.
I'd also like to bring up that startup founders tend to think, because they're already doing innovative, disruptive types of things, they tend to think, and now that I want to use the word, it's not coming to me, they tend to think that they're not susceptible to
Yes.
this type of leadership, when in fact, we as women do see that they are leading the same way inside of startups that they're lead inside of corporations. They're wearing a mask and they're lying to themselves because they think that they're doing something so different and so disruptive.
But that traditional leadership paradigm is what is rewarded still, you see, and that's why men get all the funding, because confidence is really rewarded, not competence, confidence. And women are not brought up to be as confident as men. So when they go into a pitch meeting, and they don't seem as confident, the men who are holding the purse strings to give that funding decide, oh no, I'm not going to give my money. Even the women VCs and women feel that same because of what I said, unconscious bias. I would probably feel like that. We innately think that men are better at maths than women, just better. So we think our money's going to be safer with them. So if we're going to take a punt with our money, we'd rather give it to a group of men than a group of women, which is nonsense. And it's not what is reflected in any studies at all. In fact, quite the opposite. But we reward confidence over competence, and men are brought up to be bullshit. I mean, you must have heard, you know, when a job is advertised, a man has to think that he, you know, can do 40% of it and wing the other 60 and he'll apply. But women have to think they need to be completely competent at 80%. You know, they're only happy to wing 20%. So that is because we are brought up to be empathetic and to be quiet and to be subservient. And, you know, I've got twins. They're 19 years old now, one girl, one boy. And, you know, I'm a feminist, absolute feminist. I believe in equality. And yet I have definitely brought them up differently. There is no question about that. And it's not deliberate. And society is saying so many different messages to my daughter than it is to my son. My daughter is confident, but she's not as confident as he is. She's 5 foot tall, he's 6'2". Just the physical aspect of that in the world, moving through the world, being so much smaller. She has to be aware of sexual attack whenever she goes out. especially at night. She has to worry about what she's wearing. He doesn't. He glides through life. He's 6 foot odd, you know, he's good looking, he's white, and he's middle class. The traffic lights are all on green for him. They're all on green. Maisie doesn't have that. I mean, she's extremely privileged, but she's certainly not as privileged as him. So just in my own house, I can see how a male and a female move through their life and move through the world in a very, very different way. And yeah, we are at a disadvantage, but once we're aware of that, then we can address it. And yeah, it's exciting to be able to talk about it and to raise awareness of it and to hopefully make some changes.
So what call to action would you give the women, the all the marginalized voices that are going to start realizing that they can coalesce around Startup Growing Houston as a chapter? What would be your call to action to them from our conversation today, thinking about the future and where we want to go with leadership?
Well, absolutely. Number one is you're stronger together. You need this, your group is fantastic. Find your allies, find support, discuss with them. You're not, a lone voice is overwhelming, but if you can find like-minded people, I would say definitely get together and start speaking to them. And I tell you what's absolutely powerful is to find male allies. And I call out to your listeners, if you are a man listening to this, your voice is 10 times louder than a woman's. That is just a fact. It's louder than mine. If a man stands up in a workplace and calls out sexism, people listen and the other men listen and they're more shamed about it. If a woman does the same thing and says exactly the same thing, absolutely her impact is much, much lower. She's just a nag, a whinger. It can be dismissed much more readily. So I know it's difficult for men to do this because, and it's not in everyone's character and personality to stand up and do this, but please, I would ask you to step forward, men, and to use your voice to call things out. And if you think it's right, if you think it's wrong rather, then I really would implore you just to help us on this journey, because ultimately it's better for everyone.
Well, I want to remind everybody, inside of today's event page, there are all kinds of ways that you're going to be able to go check out Ella. You'll be able to find out about Lead 50/50, all the ways that you can connect with her, whether it's in LinkedIn, whether it's their website, whether it's the assessments that they do inside of your organization. I highly encourage you to do that. And when you do reach out to her, tell her you heard her here at Startup Growing Houston, because we're going to be bringing more conversations like this in 2023 going forward. And so I'm also going to ask listeners, hold your hand up, reach out to me and say, Michelle, here's a voice I'd like to hear from. Let us know who you want to put behind the mic. And that's something that I'm more than happy to do. Thank you, Ella.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.